I was a great admirer of Wells.
They asked him to play the heavy in this thing called Badge of Evil.
And I said, why don't you have him direct? He's a pretty good director.
He welcomed ideas and he welcomed experiments. I mean, if you thought of something, he'd say, sure, let's try it.
Orson said, I'd like to improvise some scenes with you.
I don't believe we even had a rehearsal. He just said, well, let's shoot it. We were all just amazed by this spontaneity.
I had never seen a handheld camera used.
Touch of Evil was an influence on our whole generation of cinematographers.
It's consistently interesting, even fascinating.
We knew we had done things that had not been done before.
The studio took a look at the cut. They really didn't like what they saw.
Orson always said that it was rather puzzling to him, that he didn't really know why the studio turned against the film.
The studio rewrote sections, reshot, re-edited. When they finally showed the preview version to Orson, he looked at it, was not happy with what he saw, and that's when he turned around and fired back the 58-page memo.
He felt that the story was more confusing in Universal's cut than in his.
Mostly, they ignored everything that was in the memo and finished the film the way they wanted to.
Rick is the one who had the idea of seeing if he could convince Universal Pictures to go to the memo and try to follow all the instructions in it.
Trying to undo the damage that the studio had done.
I remember that when I just saw Touch of Evil, I thought, well, this is Orson back in the saddle again. You know, he really is showing all the marvelous talent that I had experienced with him on Citizen Kane.
I think I literally saw it over 20 times in the years that followed because it was such a compendium of editorial techniques, let alone photographic techniques.
I never did figure out what the plot was for about 5 or 6 times that I saw it. I didn't really know exactly what the plot was. It didn't seem to interest me terribly. And when I told that to Orson, he was appalled. You know, because he thought that the plot has to work. And I'm the one who brought up the big sleep. I said, well, the big sleep. He said, well, I never understood this cult for the big sleep. He said, it absolutely makes no sense. My understanding of how Orson became involved in this was that he had just done a picture for Universal as an actor. And they asked him to play the heavy in this thing called Badge of Evil, which is a novel. And he needed the money, so he said, okay. Then they got in touch with Charlton Heston.
I was off in Michigan, where I was raised, over the holidays and doing some hunting and so on. And the script for Touch of Evil was among a couple that I'd taken with me that I hadn't read. And I got a call from one of the Universal executives saying, you know, have you had a chance to read it? I said, it's okay. And who's directing it? And there was a pause, and the guy said, well, we don't have the director set yet, but we've got Orson Welles to play the heavy. And I said, why don't you have him direct? He's a pretty good director. There was a long pause.
And there was a pause at the other end of the line. And they said, well, let us get back to you. So then they called Orson, and they said, well, besides playing the part, would you like to direct?
One night in early of 1957, I came home from dinner, and there was a telegram there, and it said, Dear Janet, can't wait to work with you. I'm so happy you're going to be in my picture, signed Orson Welles. But I knew nothing about any pictures, so I called my agent, and he said, oh, he was not supposed to call you. There's no script yet. You haven't seen a script, and I haven't made any deal. And I said, I don't care. I want to work with Orson Welles.
His concept in his rewrite of the script of having the honest prosecutor be Mexican was obviously a very good idea. It made an excuse for the whole border crossing and so forth. And if I were to do it today, I would play it with just the faintest touch of accent. Now, of course, when Orson and I were discussing it, he said, now look, let's imagine this guy. He comes from a very wealthy Mexican family. He's going to be president of Mexico someday. He's educated at Stanford and Harvard Law, summa cum laude, and he speaks English perfectly. I dyed my hair black and grew a mustache and dyed that black and faintly olive color in the makeup. That was about the end of it.
I did not read the novel, Badge of Evil. In the novel, the girl was Hispanic and the guy was American. Of course, in the picture, it's just the opposite. So that's the way it was when it got to me, finally. The week before we started rehearsals, I was doing a TV show and I broke my arm. So I had it set, and I walked in to see Orson, and he said, "I thought you broke your arm." And I said, "Well, I did." And I showed him. He said, "Oh, that's a cinch to, camouflage." When I was in the 90 and the Teddy, what we did was we sawed the cast and took it off, and then after the shot, we'd put the cast back on with tape.
Of course, Orson was able to call on a whole galaxy of star actors to do bits for him.
We really, literally, never knew who was going to be on the set.
Joe Kalea, who was wonderful as Quinlan's deputy, I guess, and very significantly Akim Tamirov, who I guess could play almost any kind of a part, and he was wonderful.
Joseph Cotten is the doctor, and we didn't know that. It's not in the script.
And of course, Marlena was an old friend. They go way back to entertaining the troops in World War II. She was in his magic act. He sawed her in half, Orson called her to do this picture and said, "Listen, you have to play a gypsy woman." And she said, "I know where I can get my wig from Golden Earrings from Paramount. I know how I can get the wig." And he said, "Great, bring the wig and come on over and we'll work it out." And it didn't even tell Universal about it.
I had no scene with Marlene Dietrich, to my eternal disappointment.
Marlena told me she thought the best moment in any movie she ever did, her best moment was the last moment in Touch of Evil, when she says, "What does it matter what you say about people?" There's the funny story about when they were watching the dailies and suddenly they said, "Is that Marlene Dietrich?" And they say, "Yeah, that's Marlene Dietrich. Do we have a deal with her?" "No, I don't know. Where'd she come from?" "I don't know."
Dennis is one of my contributions to the film. I had some idea of how flexible an actor Dennis was. So I called Orson up on the phone and said, "You really should talk to this guy."
I got to tell you, though, I turned it down to begin with because there really weren't that many scenes in the script. So Charlton Heston came to the set of Gunsmoke and said, "You're absolutely nuts. You got an opportunity to work with Orson Welles. Everybody in Hollywood wants to be in this film. He's got people like Marlene Dietrich, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Mercedes McCambridge. If you don't do this part and have this experience of working with Orson Welles, you're nuts." And so I went home and I thought about it a while, and I said, "I think maybe Chuck is right." So I changed my mind and I accepted it.
Who knew what Dennis Weaver was going to do with that? He made it a gem.
The production office requires that one of the assistant directors call the production office as soon as the cameras start turning so they know when you actually began the work. And then they have to call again when you print the first take. And in the case of Orson and Touch of Evil, we didn't even turn the cameras till after lunch.
He said they rehearsed all day.
And so finally we started shooting and I think we first turned the camera about 3:30 or 4. And he did, I can't remember, 6, maybe 7 takes. Again, hard to reset and all that. And that was about 5:30. And then he said, "Okay, that's a print and a wrap through for the day and through with this scene entirely. We are now 2 days ahead."
They just literally shot 2 days' work in one day.
He just wanted to prove that he could. Very clever.
Orson, disliked being thought of as a show-off director, because his favorite directors were men like Ford or Renoir, whose camera work did not announce itself, as Orson would say. And when you do an opening shot that sort of announces itself, here comes a great shot, he always was a bit worried about that sort of thing, but he just didn't see any other way of doing it. It seemed like the best way to do do the scene. And it is a hell of a way to set up a story. Start on the insert of a bomb, pull back, car drives and drives and drives and drives through this whole town, you know.
The opening shot of the picture, it was such an unheard of shot. It went for like 3 or 4 blocks and 3.5 minutes. I mean, you had goats, you had cars crossing, you had, you know, policemen. Unbelievable kind of shot.
The Chapman boom scene is a great shot. It was technically very complicated.
Everything had to be just right on. And the pressure got to the man at the border.
It was understandably because he had very few lines, but they were crucial. And he would have to watch this galaxy of lights coming down the street, and the camera and the boom going up and down, and the other car going through.
And so we'd get to his part, and he'd start to talk, and he'd flub his lines. And the poor man, it got so bad. It was like, oh, you can do it, you can do it. Oh, I didn't do it. It was heartbreaking.
Then finally, it's the shot we used, the last shot, and Orson said, look, with one more take. And in the background of the shot, in the sky, you can see the sky paling. It is getting to be dawn.
So Orson said, look, we've got only a couple of more chances here. When it comes to you,
don't say anything.
Just mouth the words. And he said, and for God's sakes, don't turn around and say, I'm so sorry, Mr. Wells.
So the guy did move his lips, and he did not say anything, and we got the shot.
Later, someone asked him, why didn't you just replace him? And I love Orson for this, because he said, that would have destroyed that man.
You know, we were shooting in Venice, and there were these oil wells, these derricks, up in the middle of the night, flopping up and down, drilling this oil.
Venice, California. Before it was redone and made beautiful, it was very run down, seedy, and it looked like a border town.
It kind of had a Tijuana flavor. I don't think we would have walked those streets by ourselves at night. I remember we had all learned our lines, and I recall Wells saying, let's go to lunch, guys. But as we were sitting at lunch, he started to rewrite the scenes. He was juggling the dialogue around. As lunch ended, I recall he was handing his new script, his new notes, to the script girl, and he said, retype these and give them back to the actors. And when I looked at them, and all of a sudden I realized that my lines were not where they were supposed to be. And I went, oh my God, how are we going to do this? I don't believe we even had a rehearsal. He just said, well, let's shoot it.
One of many nights of night shooting we had in the film. Great, I would say more than half the picture takes place at night. And we were down in the basement of this hotel in Venice, peeing into the drain, because there was no men's room. And Orson said, you know, this would be a marvelous place to shoot that confrontation between you and Joe Colea. And I said, yeah, it would be nice, wouldn't it? And I said, but I think they've got that scheduled for Monday, don't they? They got the set all built back at Universal. He said, yes, but it'd be much better here. He said, we have to get Joe down here. And he called an assistant. He said, get Joe Colea down here right away. I said, Orson, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I said, he's in bed, he's asleep. He said, he'll be all the better in the performance. And he was right. They got Joe down, and he came in blinking and blowing his nose, and where was he? But which was just this sense of unease and insecurity that the character should have in the scene. And Orson, as he often was right again.
The first day of shooting that I worked, and he was in his outfit as Quinlan, I was just like, because I didn't know what he was going to do, because he wasn't that heavy at that point. You know, everyone thinks because later on he got heavy. And so when they saw A Touch of Evil, they thought that was him. And it wasn't at all. That's why I was so shocked, because as the director and just in the rehearsal actor, he wasn't anything like that. And then all of a sudden, he's got this big paunch, and he put on these jowls and the eye bags under his eyes, and he was a master at at makeup.
There's a very funny story about that. When he came back to Hollywood, he was back in Hollywood for the first time in 10 years. And he was making, for the first time in 10 years, he was shooting a picture in Hollywood also. And he threw a party for all his old friends, the Goldwyns, the Warners, everybody, and at his house. But he was shooting late, so he didn't have time to take off the makeup. So he arrived still in his Hank Quinlan makeup and padding, and he was heavily padded for the part, and he looked, you know, Orson looked pretty good at 47. He didn't look like Quinlan. Anyway, he walked in and everybody said, "Hey, Orson, oh, you look great." You know, boy, you haven't changed at all. You look just great. And he thought that was a funny comment on life in Hollywood.
As a cinematographer, I think Touch of Evil was an influence on our whole generation of cinematographers. Russell Meddy was one of the leading cinematographers of the day. Meddy's style on this film was very high contrast, that was very in keeping with Wells' previous pictures, and something that Meddy was very strong in too.
Well, Orson loved black and white film. I mean, I think, you know, he did all but one of his films in black and white. He said to me, he says, "You know about black and white, it's the actor's friend." And I said, "Why do you say that?" He says, "Because every performance looks better in black and white. In fact, I defy you to name me a great performance in color. I don't think there is one."
Understand, this is 1957, and Wells had been in France and had seen the Eclair Camaflex, which was one of the first 35mm cameras really designed to be handheld.
On a feature, I had never seen a handheld camera used. And that was the first time, I think, that an IMO camera was used to shoot, which enabled him to get, you know, he got all those things like from the shots way down here looking up there. I mean, you could manipulate it, and you got the fluidity because the camera moved with the action.
Here was Wells in turn giving a lesson to the filmmakers of the world about what these tools could mean.
Orson wanted to do what became the first dialogue scene in a moving car in the history of film. And we were shooting again down in Venice, though this was a day shot, in an alley, a long alley. But they wanted to be able to block off the traffic, of course. And Orson said, "Now we'll put the camera on a platform on the front, take out the windshield, put the camera down." And they did all that, but of course by that time the convertible was so full of equipment and lights and sound equipment, everything, that you couldn't get the sound man in, you couldn't get the camera operator in. So Orson said, and the first AD said, "Well, we can take out the whole front of the car and just pull it behind the truck." And Orson said, "No, no, no." He said, "These lads can handle this." He said, "It's easy. Just show them how to turn on the sound. And when it gets to speed and the camera, all that." So Mort was the sound man, and I was the operator and the director. And I'd say, "Action." And we'd be driving along and doing the scene, talking to each other the way you do when you have to really drive. And so we did 3 or 4 takes. And finally I said, "Cut, print. Thank you very much." And my first experience at directing.
The motel, that sequence was rather risque at that time. So many subplots going on that I don't know where the censors knew where to look first. What was suggested in that scene was gang rape, lesbianism, drugs, but we didn't exceed the censors' extremes. It was just the suggestion. It just starts with the noise, and then there's, you know, the voice through the wall, and then there's the rattle, the door, and you see the various shots of these guys, and then you see her, Mercedes McCambridge. It was so scary. And when she said that line, it was scary. I mean, I was scared. I was.
All night shooting is difficult. Shooting in the water is double difficult. We shot that scene, which is quite a long scene, over at least 2 nights. It was the end of shooting on the picture, maybe 3 nights. And I was wading across the canal and holding this wire recorder, and we finished about 6 in the morning, still dark. And we wrapped the company, and Orson and I went to get some breakfast at a coffee shop. And he brought along a bottle of a very good champagne. We shared, and we were having a happy time telling each other how wonderful we were. And I said, you know, Orson, this is a wonderful film, I think. I'm very proud of doing it and of working with you. And it's been a very exciting time. I think we have a wonderful picture. And I said, you only made one mistake. He said, what is that, my boy? He always called me my boy. And I said, there are 3 or 4 short scenes in the picture that are only there to kind of indicate that I have the leading role in the film. I said, that's not true. This film is about the fall of Captain Quinlan. But I knew that, Orson. He said, well, then we don't have to worry about it in the cutting, do we?